She called 911 on my moving truck and claimed I was invading her lake. She called 911 on me while I was moving into my own lake cabin, claiming I was invading her restricted zone. That moment lit the fuse on a fight I never asked for, but couldn't walk away from. I'll tell you exactly how a single call turned into the downfall of an entire HOA. If stories of real justice hit home for you, stick around and tap subscribe so you don't miss the next time a bully meets the truth. I pulled off the gravel road just as the morning light spilled across the lake, that soft Wyoming gold that makes the water look like it's carrying the sun on its back. The cabin sat exactly where I remembered it, tucked under a line of old pines, roof low, porch wide, the same weathered boards my father repaired with his own hands. I cut the engine and let the silence settle in. After years of working behind screens and cement walls as a dam engineer, I'd finally come home to the place that smelled like timber, lake water, and freedom. The mover's truck rumbled up behind me, kicking dust across the clearing as they eased toward the driveway. I breathed in deep, letting the cold air fill my lungs. This was supposed to be the start of something slow and peaceful, a reset, a life where the loudest sound was a loon calling across the water or wind pushing through lodgepole pines. I stepped out, my boots sinking into familiar dirt, and for a moment it felt like I'd turned back time. I could almost hear Dad on the porch saying, "Remy, the lake cures what life breaks." I believed him now more than ever, but the calm didn't last. Before the movers even lowered the ramp, a piercing voice ripped across the shoreline like someone swinging a rusty gate off its hinges. "You there! You can't park that truck here!" I turned just in time to see a woman in a bright pink windbreaker storming down the hill from the house across the road. She moved fast, too fast for someone in her 50s, with her blonde ponytail snapping behind her and a clipboard tucked under her arm like she was marching into battle. "Excuse me?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She stabbed a finger toward me. "This is private HOA territory. You're trespassing. This entire area is regulated by Lakeshore Estates. State your business." I blinked. "My business? Lady, this is my cabin." Her eyes widened like I'd just confessed to a federal crime. "Your cabin? Impossible. That property has been under administrative review for months. No access allowed. Who authorized you to be here?" I opened my truck door and grabbed the old leather folder that held the deed my father left me. "Ma'am, I don't need authorization. My name is Remy Cole. This is my land." She didn't even look at the papers. Instead, she spun on her heel, pulled out her phone, and jabbed the screen with the fury of someone reporting a national emergency. "Yes, 911? I need officers at Lakeshore Estates immediately. We have a trespasser attempting to force access into restricted HOA property. Yes, he's refusing to leave." I stepped forward. "What the hell are you doing? I just got here." She held up her finger like she was silencing a child. "Sir, do not interfere. Law enforcement is en route. You will remain exactly where you are." The movers froze, unsure whether to unload or run for cover. I could feel irritation crawling up the back of my neck. The crisp air, the quiet lake, the porch I had missed for years. She'd shattered all of it in seconds. "Look," I said, "I'm not trespassing. This land has been in my family for decades." She scoffed, eyes narrowing. "Not anymore. Lakeshore Estates has jurisdiction over all surrounding properties. We maintain strict environmental and aesthetic standards. And that driveway," she pointed to my gravel path, "is HOA maintained. You cannot use it without approval." I stared at her, stunned. "That driveway was built by my father, with a shovel, in 1982. Then he violated code," she snapped. It was so absurd I almost laughed. But she wasn't joking. She truly believed she ran this place. And worse, she acted like she owned the lake, the land, and everyone who dared live near it. Her phone buzzed. She nodded sharply. Officers are 5 minutes out. I looked over her shoulder, out toward the wide blue water, where sunlight danced between ripples. This was supposed to be my reset, my peace, my father's memory, made whole. And instead, I had a woman yelling at me on my own property, insisting she ran the world. I took a slow breath, trying to stay calm. "Why are you acting like this?" I asked quietly. "Why do you think you control this cabin, this land?" She gave me a tight, victorious smile. "Because I do." I watched her march back up the hill, radiation of authority rolling off her like smoke from a brush fire. And in that moment, something in my gut told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a warning. A question settled over me like a shadow stretching across the lake. Why did she act like she owned my cabin and the lake around it? I had no idea then how deep that answer would go. The next morning, the world looked peaceful again. Fog lifted off the lake like slow-moving breath, drifting across the water in pale ribbons. The pines stood still. The dock creaked softly. And for a moment I convinced myself yesterday's chaos had been some kind of bizarre welcome to the neighborhood fluke. Maybe Bethany Reed had just woken up on the wrong side of her HOA-issued bed. I grabbed my thermos, stepped out onto the porch, and let the cold Wyoming air settle into my lungs. The lake was glass, one of those mornings where sound seemed to disappear into the water. A perfect time to push my old aluminum fishing boat into the shallows and give myself 10 minutes of peace. I hadn't even reached the dock before I heard the sound of rapid footsteps crunching over gravel. "Stop right there!" The voice snapped across the water like a cracked whip. I closed my eyes, counted to 3, and turned. Bethany barreled down the slope again. Different outfit, same fury. Today she wore a navy blue windbreaker with LSE HOA embroidered on the chest, like she was running a federal agency. She clutched a stack of laminated documents under her arm, the edges glinting in the morning sun. "Cole, you cannot launch that vessel without a valid permit." I stared at her. "A permit? This is my boat, on my property." She shot me a look of polished disbelief. "This entire shoreline is governed by Lakeshore Estates bylaws. Boats, motorized or non-motorized, require a lake access permit. $95 a month, due on the 1st. No exceptions." I almost laughed. "You're charging me to use my own lakefront?" "Your claimed lakefront," she said, lifting her chin. She flipped open her laminated pages like she was holding ancient scripture. Section 14A. Unauthorized watercraft will result in citation, towing, and possible legal action. I leaned in, scanning the page. The HOA logo was misaligned, the text full of typos, and the signature line listed something like, "Board approval, authorized by Governance Unit 3. It looked like it had been designed on a home printer from 2006. "Who wrote this?" I asked. "Our compliance department." "And how many people are in that department?" She hesitated. "That's irrelevant." A soft cough came from behind me. I turned to see a neighbor, a thin man in his 60s, standing by the fence, hands shoved into his pockets. "Morning," he muttered to me, then looked nervously toward Bethany. "Everything all right?" Bethany glared at him until he lowered his eyes and shuffled away. Fear. I recognized it instantly. It was the same look people gave corporate managers who abused power back when I worked engineering contracts. She waited for him to leave before stepping closer. "Your presence is already causing disruptions," she said. "We have standards here. People move to the lake for peace, not unruly activity." "Unruly?" I lifted my coffee. "I'm holding a thermos. Your boat creates disturbances, visual disturbances, and we've had reports of noise." "Noise?" I whispered. "Bethany, it's 7 in the morning. Even the fish are still asleep." She pulled another laminated page from her folder and thrust it at me. These are the approved hours for shoreline movement. Shoreline movement? I echoed. Yes, walking, stepping, or operating near water after 7:30 p.m. or before 8 a.m. is prohibited. I stared at her like she'd just announced she controlled the moon. She huffed when I didn't respond, tapping her pen impatiently. I need your signature acknowledging receipt of these regulations. I didn't take the pen. You know what? Let me check something first. I walked back up the porch, opened my father's old lockbox, and pulled out the manila envelope containing the lake deed. My father always said, "A man who owns paper owns peace," and right then those words felt heavier than ever. She folded her arms smugly. Whatever paperwork you think you have, the HOA's jurisdiction supersedes private claims. I ignored her, pulled up the county website on my phone, and typed in the parcel ID. A loading screen, then a map, then a color-coded property overlay. The shoreline, every foot of it around my cabin, was marked private ownership, Cole family water rights. I zoomed in again just to be sure. No HOA parcels, not a single one touching the water. My eyebrows rose. Huh, would you look at that? Her smile faltered. Look at what? Your HOA doesn't own the shoreline. Any of it. Not even a sliver. Which means your lake rules, these laminated masterpieces, don't apply. She blanched. That's impossible. No, I said softly. What's impossible is charging people $95 to access water that isn't yours. For the first time since I'd met her, Bethany Reed looked shaken. Just for a second. Then she recovered, lips tightening. The county records must be outdated, she snapped. We've had recent revisions. Show me, I said. Show me the filings. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like she was trying to catch a thought that slipped away. I don't need to prove anything to you, she said. I will be issuing a violation notice for non-compliance. She stormed off, windbreaker flapping behind her. As she climbed the hill toward her house, a neighbor 2 lots down leaned across his porch railing. His voice drifted over the quiet water. She got you too, huh? Got me? I called back. She finds people for breathing wrong near the lake, he said. Be careful. Folks who stand up to her don't last long. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet pine. I glanced at the crumpled laminated permit still clutched in my hand. Something cold settled in my stomach. This wasn't about lakeshore rules or noise complaints. If the HOA had no legal claim, if the documents were fake, if neighbors were too scared to challenge her, then what exactly was Bethany enforcing? I looked back toward her house, the one perched above the lake like a queen's throne. A curtain fluttered, and for a heartbeat I could swear someone was watching me. The question returned, sharper this time. If the HOA didn't own the lake, then what was she really protecting? I had no idea the answer would shake the entire shoreline. By the third morning, the lake felt different, quieter, heavier, like it knew something I didn't. A cold wind drifted across the surface, carrying the smell of wet stone and pine sap. I stepped out onto the porch, expecting a peaceful start. But the moment my boots hit the wooden planks, I saw her. Bethany stood at the end of my driveway with 2 men beside her. Clipboards, matching navy windbreakers. Faces blank like they'd been trained to show nothing. They looked like HOA mall cops, except they were dressed as if they worked for a federal agency that only existed in her imagination. One of them lifted a camera and snapped a photo of my porch. Another pointed at my truck like he was marking evidence. I walked down the steps, jaw tight. What now? Bethany spoke without turning. We received several reports of hazardous unloading, visual disturbances, and potential code violations on your property. Reports? I asked. From who? You're the only one who's been here. That is confidential, she replied. Compliance matters are handled internally. The taller man scribbled something onto his clipboard. Noted. Non-cooperative attitude. I laughed once. You haven't asked me a question. That tone, Bethany snapped. Aggressive behavior noted as well. I stared at her, the incredulity hitting me so hard I almost forgot to breathe. Are you out of your mind? The second safety volunteer stepped forward. Sir, please refrain from escalating. I'm standing still, I said. Verbal escalation, he corrected, tapping his badge, which was just a shiny sticker reading HOA Safety Division. My irritation bubbled straight into anger. Lady, you've called the police on me for moving boxes. You've tried charging me to walk on my own shoreline. And now you're sending your fan club to photograph my truck? Bethany clicked her pen like it was a trigger. We are documenting all activity for community safety. Furthermore, she snapped her fingers, and one of the men pulled out a folded paper, a citation for grass height inconsistency. I blinked. Grass height? Your lawn exceeds the maximum visual harmony level. She pointed to a patch of wild grass near the fence. 5 inches in a lakeside community is unacceptable. That's a natural meadow, I said. My father left it that way. It's part of the landscape. Not anymore. She handed me the citation like she was serving a court summons. Failure to correct this within 48 hours will result in a fine. I rubbed a hand over my jaw. You really want me gone, don't you? Bethany didn't answer. Instead, she whispered something to one of her volunteers. They nodded and pulled out their phones, snapping more photos of the cabin, the steps, even the windows. You're documenting my house? I asked. For compliance review, she said flatly. This is harassment, I muttered. No, she said, leaning close. This is order, something you don't seem to value. Just then, the familiar rumble of a sheriff's SUV rolled up my gravel driveway. Sheriff Marcus Hale stepped out, dust lifting around his boots. His hat was low, and his expression told me this wasn't his first time dealing with her nonsense. Morning, folks, he called. Got another call, Bethany? She straightened, putting on her best professional smile. Officer Hale, thank you for coming. We have a resident refusing to comply with HOA safety guidelines, and he has displayed aggressive tendencies toward our staff. Marcus looked at me. Aggressive? I raised a hand a few inches. I said good morning. He sighed. Bethany, you can't keep calling every time a leaf falls sideways. This is a valid concern, she insisted. We have rules. Marcus scratched his chin. No, you don't. Not for his property. We've been over this. Bethany turned a sharp shade of red. Officer Hale, if you refuse to perform your duty, he cut her off. My duty is to enforce the law, not your clipboard fantasies. Her volunteers gasped. Bethany took a step back like she'd been slapped. I will be reporting your misconduct to the sheriff's office. Marcus's lips twitched. I am the sheriff's office. She sputtered, then spun toward her volunteers. Document his hostility, all of it. They scrambled to take notes. Marcus leaned in toward me. You holding up? Not sure, I said quietly. Feels like she's trying to build a case. He nodded. That's how she works. Pushes until folks crack. Most either move away or fall in line. And you can't stop her? I asked. She skirts the line, he admitted. Pushes rules she invents. But unless someone files a formal complaint, she keeps getting away with it. I looked at the lake behind him. Calm, deceptively calm. The wind carried the faint metallic rattle of my dock chain tapping the post. That simple sound suddenly felt like a warning. Bethany stepped between us. Are you two finished conspiring? I have work to do. Marcus ignored her. If she bothers you again, Remy, call me directly. Don't wait for another false report. He tipped his hat and drove off, leaving dust swirling in the sunlit air. Bethany watched his SUV disappear, then turned to me with a smile colder than lake ice. I hope you enjoy your stay, temporary as it may be. She marched away, her volunteers trailing behind her like obedient shadows. I stood there, gripping the fake citation in my hand, feeling anger simmer beneath the surface. Something about the way she looked at me, like she knew she could wear people down, made my skin tighten. As the wind picked up, rustling the tall grass she'd just called inconsistent, a thought hit me with unwelcome clarity. She wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to break me. But why? Why me? Why my shoreline? The lake shimmered under the morning light. But beneath that calm surface, something darker was taking shape, and Bethany Reed was just getting started. By evening, the sky had dimmed into a deep Wyoming blue, streaked with thin clouds drifting low over the ridge. The wind pushed softly across the water, carrying the smell of cold stone and damp earth. I'd spent the day trying to unpack the basics: boxes of old tools, my father's fishing gear, a few framed photos. But Bethany's harassment clung to me like dust on denim. Every time I stepped outside, I expected her voice to cut through the wind again. For once, the shoreline was quiet. I grilled a simple dinner on the porch, trying to let the crackle of the flame settle some of the tension in my shoulders. The silence should have been comforting. It wasn't. It felt like the type of quiet that sits in a room right before something breaks. Around 11 p.m., I walked down to the dock with a lantern, just wanting a few minutes near the water. The moon hung low, turning the lake into a sheet of silver. My kayak sat tied to the post where I left it, gently bumping against the wood in the shallow waves. The boards creaked under my boots with every step. That should have been a peaceful sound. Instead, the hairs on my arms stood up. Something felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. Too watched. I shook off the feeling and headed back inside. I locked the door, turned off the lantern, and let the cabin settle into its old, familiar creaks. I must have been asleep for an hour or two when a noise cut through the darkness. A sharp thunk, then a metallic scrape. I sat up. The cabin was still. The kind of stillness where your ears amplify everything. The ticking of the wall clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the wind whispering through the trees. Then another sound, heavy footfalls on my dock. I moved to the window and slid it open just enough to see outside. The moonlight reflected off the water, casting long shadows across the shoreline. At first I didn't see anyone. Then, movement. Two figures, hooded, broad-shouldered, creeping along the dock. One knelt beside my kayak. The other stood guard, glancing toward my cabin. Their silhouettes were clear against the shimmering lake. They weren't trying to hide. They didn't even look nervous, because they thought nobody would stop them. My jaw tightened. I pressed the record button on my phone and held it to the glass. The kneeling man pulled out a knife, long, curved, and dragged it across the kayak's hull. A harsh ripping sound echoed over the water. Slash, slash, slash. Then he whispered to the other. She said this'll make him rethink staying. Bethany. My stomach twisted, but I kept recording. The second man walked up the dock to my garden, my father's garden, and dumped something from a sack. The plants wilted almost instantly under the chemical shine. I swallowed anger so hot it felt like fire. Then one of them spray-painted across my dock in jagged red letters. Move or else. I stepped back from the window, pulse pounding in my ears. My mind raced, not just with anger, but with clarity. These weren't random vandals. They were comfortable, confident, like they'd been doing this for years, and no one had stopped them. When they finally left, heading back up the hill toward Bethany's house, I slipped outside quietly. The night air hit me like a slap. Cold, sharp, electric. My boots crunched on gravel as I examined the damage up close. Kayak, ruined. Garden, poisoned. Dock, vandalized. Fence, kicked in. And footprints, size 12 work boots, leading straight toward the HOA president's property. I lifted the spray-painted board with trembling hands. My father built that dock. Every plank, every nail. It felt like someone had carved into his memory. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Sheriff Hale responding to the video clip I'd sent. Sheriff Hale. You safe? I'm on my way. Stay inside. I stood alone under the moonlight, listening as the lake lapped softly against the shore, like it was whispering something old, something Dad used to say. A lake doesn't hide secrets, son. It reflects them. By the time Marcus pulled up, lights flashing low to avoid waking the neighbors, the damage was undeniable. He surveyed everything with a grim expression, jaw working. Bethany? He asked quietly. I nodded. Her safety volunteers. They didn't even hide their faces. Marcus exhaled through his nose. They think they're above the law. Been pushing folks out for years. Why? I asked. What's the end game? He hesitated. That's what I'm trying to figure out. He photographed the evidence carefully, documenting each angle with a practiced hand. But the more he worked, the tighter his expression got. When he finished, he stepped closer to me. Remy, this isn't just harassment. Someone wants you gone. I know. And that, he said, glancing at the red paint, means they're hiding something they don't want you anywhere near. The wind picked up, sweeping across the water like a breath. A storm cloud moved slowly over the moon, dimming the shoreline into shadows. What is she hiding? I asked again. Marcus shook his head. Something big. Folks don't act like this over lawn height. We stood there in the dark, both staring at the destroyed kayak bobbing weakly in the water. It was clear now. This wasn't random. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Bethany wasn't just an overbearing neighbor. She was protecting something. Something she'd destroy anyone to keep buried. And tonight was her warning shot. The lake whispered softly against the dock, as if urging me to listen. I didn't know it then, but the truth was about to peel open the entire shoreline. The next morning felt colder than it should have, not because of the weather. The sun actually broke clear over the ridge, but because the damage around me made everything look sharper, harsher, stripped of the peace I'd hoped for. The kayak lay slumped on the bank like an injured animal. The red, spray-painted threat glared at me from the dock. My father's garden, gone, wilted under that oily poison someone had dumped. But beneath all that anger, something else lit up inside me, something old, something steady. The engineer. The same part of me that used to walk dam spillways and read the story of a river in the shape of its banks. The part that could look at a blueprint and predict where the pressure would break. Bethany Reed wasn't a mystery. She was a structure, and every structure has weak points. I stepped back inside, opened the cedar chest where my father stored his important documents, and pulled out the thick, weather-worn binder labeled simply, coal, water rights, surveys, deeds. I set it on the kitchen table and flipped it open. Dust rose in the sunlight, swirling like tiny ghosts of the past. My father's handwriting filled page after page. Measurements, sketches, maps of the shoreline drawn with pencil lines that had softened over the years, but still held their truth. I traced the lines with my thumb. 1971, 1976, 1983, 1999. Every survey, every signed water rights certificate, every letter from the county, every note about seasonal lake levels and extended shoreline boundaries. Dad never trusted computers. He trusted paper. And looking at it now, I understood why. The deeper I dug, the more something came into focus, something Bethany desperately wanted hidden. My family didn't just own this cabin. We owned senior riparian rights to more than half the lake. I unfolded a large blueprint, edges frayed, ink faded, and laid it across the table. It showed the old county survey when the lake was still considered agricultural water. Back then, my grandfather purchased permanent rights to maintain the water line for irrigation. Those rights were never dissolved, never transferred, never shared with any HOA, meaning Bethany's entire lake authority was built on nothing but laminated lies. A wind gust pushed through the cracked kitchen window, fluttering the papers as if urging me to keep going. I pulled out the most important document in the pile. Water Rights Certificate, Cole Family, issued 1953, signed, stamped, filed. I exhaled slowly. Dad, you brilliant old man. As the truth clicked together piece by piece, the cabin around me seemed to breathe with me, the wood groaning softly, the floorboards settling like they approved. I grabbed my phone and zoomed into the county plat map again. Every line matched these documents. Not 1 inch contradicted my father's records. But something about the map bothered me. A thin boundary line, barely visible, looped around several lakefront homes, including mine. Not HOA parcels, not county easements, private survey adjustments, performed 4 years ago. Under a company name I didn't recognize, Lakeshore Management Solutions, LLC. I whispered the name aloud. The sound tasted wrong. I checked the business license, registered 2 towns over. Address listed, a P.O. box. Owner, undisclosed. My gut twisted. Bethany wasn't just enforcing fake rules. She'd tried to legally rewrite the shoreline, rewrite my rights. I felt the cabin close around me, not in fear, but in focus. All the anger that had scattered like broken glass the night before gathered into something sharper, something steady. I stepped out onto the porch with the water rights deed tucked under my arm. The lake glimmered back at me as if waiting for the moment I'd finally see what it had been trying to show me. This is what she's afraid of, I said aloud. My father's neighbor, Tom, the Vietnam vet from down the road, had just started his morning walk. He slowed when he saw me holding the paperwork. You look like a man who found something important, he said. Tom, did you know about this? I held up the certificate. About my family's rights to the lake? He blinked, eyes widening. Your dad never told you? No, I said. Did he tell anyone? Tom stepped closer, lowering his voice. Your father, he didn't want trouble. He didn't like fighting with people. He always said the lake would sort itself out. He looked toward Bethany's house. But she's not the kind you can ignore. You think this is why she's targeting me? He nodded slowly. I think she's been waiting for a moment just like this. You moving in, you brought back the one thing she can't control. What's that? The truth. A slow, cold breeze swept across the water, rippling the surface like a warning. I looked down at the documents, at the weight of 70 years of my family's history, and then back toward the ridge where Bethany's house sat, perched like a hawk's nest above the lake. The vandalism wasn't random. The harassment wasn't personal. The fake permits weren't incompetence. Bethany was protecting a lie, one she'd built her entire HOA kingdom on. And with one blueprint and one deed, I could tear it apart. But the engineer in me knew better than to strike first. A rushed blow collapses the wrong wall. No. First, I'd gather every document, every survey, every piece of evidence, every neighbor willing to talk. Then, when the time was right, I'd hit the structure at its weakest point, and the whole thing would come down. A gust of wind rattled the old iron chain on the dock, sounding almost like applause. I looked out across the rippling water and whispered, "All right, Dad, let's do this your way." The lake shimmered back, as if it already knew the storm that was coming. By late afternoon, word had spread, quietly, cautiously, that I'd stood up to Bethany. Not publicly, not loudly, but folks heard things on this lake. Wind carried whispers farther than most people realized. I'd barely made it down the dirt road toward town when I saw someone waving at me from a sagging porch 2 cabins over. It was Tom, the Vietnam vet who walked with a slight limp, always wearing the same old canvas jacket even when it was warm. He raised his hand again, firmer this time, motioning me over like he had something urgent to say. I pulled into his gravel drive. His old hound dog barked once and then flopped back down beside the steps. "Remy," Tom said, lowering his voice as I climbed out of the truck. "You got a minute?" "I've got several," I replied. "What's going on?" He gestured toward the side of his house. "Let's talk where nobody's watching." We walked to the back porch, sheltered by a tangle of overgrown lilac bushes. The boards creaked under our weight, the whole structure leaning just enough to remind me it was older than most folks living on the lake. Tom closed the screen door gently, as if even that sound might attract attention. He didn't sit, not at first. He studied me with tired, knowing eyes. "You're stirring up something that's been sitting foul for years." "Bethany?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "For a long time, she's run this place like she owns it. Folks too scared to say anything, or too tired." I crossed my arms. "Why doesn't anyone report her?" "They tried," he said. "Some got hit with violation notices. Others had their mailboxes smashed, gardens torn up, noise complaints filed against them, until the sheriff got tired of showing up. Eventually, people moved out." "So she pushes people until they break," I said. "She's got help," Tom replied, leaning closer. "Those 2 men you saw on your dock last night? They're not just volunteers. They're her enforcers, paid under the table." I felt a tightness in my jaw. "Sheriff Hale said something similar." Tom nodded. "Marcus tries to stop her, but she works loopholes, and the county doesn't want to wade into HOA drama. So everyone's stuck. Until now." Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn envelope. "Some of us, we've been saving things." He handed it to me, and inside I found photos of Bethany yelling at a mother whose child rode a bike too close to the water, a screenshot of an HOA noise violation issued to a deaf couple, a letter threatening to place a lien on a widow's house over a sunset view obstruction, receipts for $95 lake access fees from at least 10 families, a shaky video of Bethany screaming at Tom himself for flying a small American flag. "This is just the start," Tom said. "Others have more. We've been collecting them because we knew someday someone with a backbone might move in." I looked up. "Why me?" "You're the first person she couldn't intimidate on day 1. His voice softened. "She sensed that, so she hit you harder." I exhaled slowly, staring at the pile of evidence in my hands. "How many families has she run off?" "At least 3 since I've lived here. Probably more before." He paused. "But you shook her with that county map. She wasn't expecting you to be the kind of man who checks filings." I tucked the papers back into the envelope. "This lake belongs to my family, Tom. Always has." "That's exactly why she needs you gone," he whispered. We walked back inside, where he led me to his dining table. 7 people sat there. Men, women, older couples, each with stacks of papers, printed emails, photographs, all quietly laid out like contraband. They turned to me as I stepped in. "Remy Cole," Tom announced softly. "The man who's finally giving us a chance." A woman with iron gray hair slid forward a folder filled with printed screenshots of HOA threats. "She fined my grandson for laughing too loud," she said. "He's 6. Another neighbor, a younger father, placed a notice on the table. "She said my grill was a safety threat." A third whispered, "She tore down my handmade birdhouse, called it visual pollution." Evidence. Pain. Years of being stepped on. I took a breath and met their eyes. "I'm not here to fight anyone, but I won't be pushed off my own land." Tom leaned back in his chair. That's why we're here, because none of us can fight her alone. I looked over the piles of documents, my fingers brushing a stack of invoices labeled Lakeshore Management Solutions, LLC. There it was again, that ghost company from the county map. I lifted one invoice. She charge you all through this? Yes, the younger father said. Every month. We never knew where the money went. I swallowed hard. I think I do. The room hushed. My mind raced. Connecting documents, dates, fake rules, that shady LLC. I could feel the old engineering instinct firing again, piecing together the fracture line of a failing structure. If I'm right, I said quietly, she's been running a fraud scheme for years. Gasps circled the room. What do we do? The elderly woman whispered. I looked out the window toward the lake. The water rippled like it was nodding. We gather everything, I said. We document. We build a case. And then? Tom asked. And then, I said, gripping the envelope tight, we bring in someone Bethany can't bully. A soft knock sounded at the front door, so light it was almost cautious. Tom frowned. Who's that? He opened the door, and Sheriff Marcus Hale stepped inside, tipping his hat. Evening, folks, he said quietly. Word travels fast around a lake. Mind if I join the conversation? We all stared at him. Marcus lifted a manila folder of his own. Because I think it's time we talked about what Bethany's been hiding. The room fell silent, the air thick with the weight of everything we'd uncovered. And for the first time since I arrived at the lake, I didn't feel alone, not one bit. The sun had barely risen when I heard tires crunching along my gravel drive the next morning. The sound carried through the quiet like a slow drumbeat. I stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee warming my hands, bracing for another confrontation with Bethany. But instead of her pink windbreaker, I saw a familiar silver SUV glide to a stop. The door opened, and out stepped Sarah Mitchell, the attorney I'd called 2 days earlier. A friend from my old engineering days had given me her number, saying she was the kind of lawyer who reads every comma in a water rights case. She specialized in land use, riparian disputes, property law, exactly the kind of ally I needed. Today her dark hair was tied back, and a stack of folders rode under one arm. She looked around the property, her eyes sharp, taking in the dock, the vandalism, the proximity of Bethany's house, the lay of the land. She didn't waste time. You weren't exaggerating, she said, stepping up the porch. This is bad. It's been a week, I replied. She raised an eyebrow. Then we better get ahead of this before she pushes harder. Inside the cabin, the dining table had become a command center. Surveys, invoices, neighbor statements, photos, county maps, lakeshore measurements. Tom and 2 other neighbors were already there, sorting through documents like volunteers preparing for a relief mission. Sarah set her folders down and pulled out a thick binder. Before we start, Remy, I need you to hear this. She opened to a page marked with a red tab. It was the county's official record of lake jurisdiction. In Wyoming, she said, riparian rights aren't something you can simply assign or transfer without the express consent of all legal water rights holders. And according to this, she tapped the page, the only original rights on file belong to the Cole family. My father, I whispered. She nodded. Your family's rights were grandfathered in before Lakeshore Estates even existed. That means Bethany has 0 legal claim on this water, I finished. Not just 0 claim, Sarah said. Her entire enforcement campaign is illegal. Every permit, every fee, every citation. Fraudulent at best. Extortion at worst. A ripple of shock moved through the room. Tom let out a low whistle. Knew she was trouble, but extortion? Sarah continued. We need to build a bulletproof case before we confront her. Years of patterns, documented harassment, misuse of HOA authority, And this, she pulled a page from her binder, a glossy printout, a scanned filing. Proves she's been using a shell company. I leaned in. Lakeshore Management Solutions, LLC. Sarah nodded. Registered to a postal box. No listed officers, no tax filings. Most likely created to funnel illegal lake fees. My pulse thudded. So she's been collecting thousands under a fake company and passing it off as HOA approved, she said. The room fell silent. Wind rustled the cabin walls, pressing soft shadows across the paperwork. Somewhere outside, a loon called across the lake, a long, lonely sound that echoed like a warning. Sarah looked around at the neighbors. Has anyone here given consent for the HOA to regulate the lake? Every head shook. Has anyone voted on lake control measures? More head shakes. Then her entire operation collapses under scrutiny. I exhaled, feeling the weight shift, like the tide turning. Sarah tapped her folder decisively. Now comes the hard part. We need clean evidence, no speculation, no assumptions, just facts. Tom leaned forward. What kind of facts? 3 categories, she said, holding up her fingers. 1. Proof of fake authority. 2. Proof of financial misconduct. 3. Proof of harassment and retaliation. She looked at me. You have all 3. I handed her the vandalism footage. Here's retaliation. She slipped it into a labeled sleeve. Tom pushed forward the neighbor's invoices. Financial misconduct. Another sleeve. I pulled the water rights deed from the cedar chest. And here's the authority. Sarah placed it gently at the center of the table, the way someone sets down an artifact in a museum. The old paper caught the morning light, casting a golden glow across the ink. This, she whispered, is the paper that ends her rule. But just as confidence began to steady the room, a heavy knock sounded at the front door. 3 sharp raps, authoritative, demanding. Everyone froze. Tom mouthed, "Bethany?" Sarah gestured for us to stay quiet. She approached the door slowly and looked through the side window. Her jaw clenched. She turned back to us. "It's her." I walked to the window beside her and peeked through the blinds. Bethany stood on the porch like a self-appointed general, clipboard held like a shield. The same 2 men from the dock flanked her, broad and stern, their arms crossed. She raised her voice loud enough to carry through the lake air. "Mr. Cole, you are required to attend an emergency HOA compliance meeting tomorrow morning. Failure to appear will result in immediate escalation of enforcement measures." Sarah whispered, "She's bluffing. She knows you're close to something." Bethany continued, "You have violated multiple sections of Lakeshore Estates regulations. Your presence is now considered a threat to community stability." Tom murmured, "Community stability? She poisoned your garden?" Outside, Bethany pointed to the door. "Open up, Mr. Cole, or we'll consider you non-compliant." Sarah's voice was calm but firm. "Don't open that. Everything she's doing is meant to provoke." I stepped back, pulse steadying. "Then what do we do?" Sarah gathered the deed, the surveys, and the videos into her briefcase, snapping it shut. "Tomorrow," she said, "we walk into that meeting together." She looked at each of us in turn. "And we bring every piece of truth with us." The air inside the cabin grew still, charged with quiet determination. The lake outside remained calm, but I knew it was the kind of calm that comes right before weather breaks over the mountains. Sarah placed a hand on the deed. "Remy, the HOA has 0 legal authority over the lake. 0. And tomorrow, they're going to hear it." A new clarity settled in my chest. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were preparing. The storm Bethany started was about to turn back toward her, and this time it would hit with the weight of 70 years of truth. The next morning rose gray and heavy, the kind of sky that sits low over the water as if waiting for something to snap. A thin fog drifted over the lake, softening the shoreline, blotting out the far bank. Even the birds seemed quiet, like the world itself held its breath. I stepped out onto the porch in a clean shirt, deed folder under my arm. The dock creaked softly as waves tapped the wood. My father used to say lakes are like people. They sense trouble before it comes. I could feel that now, a slow pressure building in the air. A car door shut behind me. Sarah approached, hair pinned back, dark blazer crisp against the morning chill. Ready? As I'll ever be. Tom and two other neighbors met us at the end of my drive, each holding folders of their own, evidence, letters, photos. They weren't just showing up. They were standing up. Sarah looked at us like a general inspecting her line. Remember, stay calm. No arguing. We let the documents speak. The sheriff is already inside. A hint of strength pushed through my nerves. Marcus had our backs. That alone felt like a life vest in rough water. We headed up the hill toward the HOA clubhouse, a pretentious wooden building Bethany renovated with mandatory community improvement fees. The path wound through pines and past manicured lawns that looked too perfect to be natural. As we approached, I caught sight of Bethany through the clubhouse window. She was pacing, fast, agitated, her expression sharp enough to slice glass. Good. For once, she was the one unsteady. Inside, the clubhouse smelled of lemon cleaner and stale coffee. A long table dominated the center of the room, rows of folding chairs facing it. Sheriff Marcus Hale leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, eyes alert. The moment he saw me, he nodded. Across the table, Bethany stood flanked by her board members, 6 people, all stiff and nervous. Her volunteers lingered near the door, blocking the exit as if they expected trouble. Bethany plastered on a brittle smile. Well, the troublemaker arrives. I ignored her and took a seat. Sarah sat beside me, calm, collected, opening her folder with slow precision. Bethany cleared her throat loudly, demanding attention. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that failure to comply with Lakeshore Estates regulations may result in fines, citations, and potential removal from community records. Sarah didn't even look up. And before we begin, she said coolly, I'd like to remind you that issuing fraudulent regulations is a criminal offense under state law. A ripple spread through the room like a stone dropped into water. Bethany's jaw tightened. Fraudulent? Hardly. Everything we do is within the scope of HOA authority. Which authority? Sarah asked. The one your HOA doesn't have over lake property? Bethany blinked. Just once, but enough to reveal the blow landed. I placed my father's water rights deed on the table. The old paper slid across the surface like a quiet hammer. This, I said, is the original water rights deed for this lake. My family's rights were established 70 years ago and never transferred. You have no jurisdiction here, not over the shoreline, not over the water, not over me. For a moment, the room went silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Then Bethany laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Those documents are ancient, outdated, irrelevant. We have newer filings. Sarah raised a brow. You mean these? She pulled out copies of the Lakeshore Management Solutions invoices and slapped them down. Filed under a shell corporation with no legal officers, no tax records, and no authorization from residents. A board member paled. Sarah continued, You've been collecting illegal lake access fees for years, thousands of dollars, no accounting, no board approval, no legal basis. Bethany's voice pitched high. That's ridiculous. I don't need your interpretation of our processes. Sheriff Hale stepped forward, his boots thudding softly. She's not interpreting anything, Bethany. She's stating facts. We've been looking into these complaints for months, and after what happened on Remy's property, he shook his head. It's time. Bethany's face reddened. You have no right to interfere. This is a private meeting. This is an investigation, Marcus corrected. You called 911 on a homeowner moving into his own cabin. You sent people to vandalize his property. You issued citations you had no authority to issue. Bethany jabbed a finger at her board. Stop him! Say something! But none of them moved. None spoke. One man slowly slid his chair away from her. Sarah continued calmly. Additionally, you've issued violation notices without evidence, threatened multiple residents, and engaged in harassment campaigns. Tom placed his own folder on the table. Got proof right here. Bethany's hands trembled. You're all misinformed, misled. The HOA exists to maintain order. Sarah tapped the deed again. You can't maintain what you don't own. Bethany's voice cracked. I'll sue all of you, every last one. Sheriff Hale shook his head. No, Bethany. Today's not about threats. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. It's about truth. He placed it on the table in front of her. A judge reviewed the preliminary evidence this morning. There's an emergency order you need to read. Bethany snatched it, scanning quickly. Her face shifted color. First pink, then white, then something between fury and shock. She slammed the paper down. This is absurd. You can't ban an HOA from the lake. You're not banned from the lake, Marcus said. You're banned from regulating it. Her voice rose to a shriek. That's the same thing. No, Sarah said quietly. It's called the law. The room erupted in murmurs, but amidst the noise I saw something else, something more important than her outrage. Her fear. Real fear. Because for the first time, her control was slipping through her fingers like water through a sieve. Bethany staggered back a step. You don't understand. I built this community. I kept it together. Sarah interrupted gently, with the tone of a surgeon making a final incision. And now it's time to stop. Bethany's breathing turned ragged. Her eyes darted to her volunteers for backup, but they stayed still, unsure, shrinking away from her unraveling authority. The dam she built, of lies, intimidation, fake rules, was cracking. And we were all watching it happen in real time. This meeting, Sarah said, closing her binder, is over. But the worst break, the loudest crack, was still coming. We all felt it, like thunder waiting behind a far ridge, because truth doesn't fall quietly. It hits like a storm. By the time we stepped out of the clubhouse, the fog had lifted, revealing a sky so bright it almost felt mocking. The lake stretched out like a mirror, catching strips of sunlight between soft rolling waves. If someone had walked by that moment, they'd never have guessed an entire empire had cracked open inside those walls. Sarah walked ahead with steady, clipped steps, briefcase tucked under her arm. Sheriff Marcus followed, radio buzzing lightly at his belt. The neighbors filed out behind us. The same people who once walked these roads with their heads down now held their shoulders higher. But the quiet didn't last. Because as soon as we reached the gravel lot, a black county sedan pulled up, dust curling behind it. A man in a gray suit stepped out, holding a thick stack of documents under one arm. He carried the posture of someone used to delivering news with consequences. The judge's clerk. He approached Marcus first. Emergency order just signed, Sheriff. Full authority to enforce. Marcus nodded and took the paperwork with both hands, scanning it quickly. My heart thumped once, hard. I could feel the moment tightening, gathering, like the lake was holding its breath all over again. Marcus lifted his eyes to me. It's official. Then he turned to face the crowd, several residents who had gathered after hearing whispers about the meeting. Effective immediately, Marcus read, voice deep and steady. Lakeshore Estates HOA is prohibited from enforcing any regulations, issuing any citations, or collecting any fees relating to lake access, shoreline property, or any portion of the waterfront. Gasps rippled through the group. The clerk added, Additionally, the court has ordered a full audit of HOA financial activity for the past 5 years. Tom muttered, "Oh, she's gonna blow." He wasn't wrong, because at that exact moment, the clubhouse doors burst open behind us. Bethany charged out, eyes wild, hair coming loose from its tight ponytail. She no longer looked like the queen of the lake. She looked like someone whose kingdom had burned to the ground overnight. "What is this?" she shrieked, pointing at the papers in Marcus's hand. "Let me see that." Marcus held the documents protectively against his chest. "Ma'am, please calm down." "I will not calm down." Her voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. "This is my community. I built every rule, every standard. Everything here runs because of me." Sarah stepped forward. "Your rules were illegal." Bethany spun toward her, fists balled. You don't understand. Without structure, everything falls apart. These people need leadership." A man from the crowd spoke up. "Leadership doesn't mean control, Bethany." Another woman added, "You fined my family for grilling on our own deck." A third whispered, "You yelled at my daughter for laughing too loud." Each voice was like a pebble hitting the surface of the lake, ripples spreading, gathering. The cracks in her facade deepened. Bethany lunged toward Marcus, trying to grab the emergency order. "Give me that right now." Marcus stepped back firmly. "That's enough." "I am the HOA president," she screamed, voice splintering at the edges. "I make the rules here." Sarah's voice cut through the chaos like a clean blade. "Not anymore." The judge's clerk stepped beside her. "Ma'am, you are hereby notified that the court has authorized criminal charges pending review of your conduct." Bethany froze. "What?" she whispered. Marcus opened another folder, the vandalism report, with photos of my slashed kayak, the poisoned garden, the spray-painted threat. "These are under investigation," he said calmly. "We have video evidence of your volunteers trespassing and damaging private property. Charges include harassment, vandalism conspiracy, filing false police reports, and operating without legal authority." The last word hung in the air. Authority. The very thing she built her power on. The thing she never truly had. Bethany's eyes darted wildly from face to face, looking for someone, anyone, to stand with her. But nobody stepped forward. Her volunteers stayed still. Her board members backed away. Even the wind seemed to shift away from her. No, this isn't happening," she stammered. "This is my lake, my community. You can't take it." A deputy's cruiser pulled up behind her, lights flashing silently. 2 deputies stepped out. The younger one spoke gently. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." She backed away, shaking her head. No, someone call my supervisor. Call the county. Call anyone." The older deputy stepped forward. "Ma'am." Her voice shrank to a tiny, broken whisper. "Don't do this." But they did. They guided her toward the cruiser. She didn't fight, not physically. Her resistance had already collapsed under the weight of truth. As the car door closed behind her, the lake wind picked up, brushing through the pines overhead, scattering leaves across the gravel lot. A sound rose, soft at first, then growing. Applause, not mocking, not cruel, but relieved, grateful. Neighbors clapped softly, some crying, some hugging, some simply staring at the lake like they were seeing it for the first time in years. I felt Sarah at my side. "This is what justice looks like, Remy." And just when the crowd began to settle, the clerk spoke again. "One more item," he announced, raising a document. "All residents who paid illegal lake access fees will receive full reimbursement." A cheer rose. Tom pumped his fist in the air. Marcus smiled slightly. "Guess the lake belongs to the people again." I looked out at the water, calm, steady, reflecting the late morning sunlight. The lake had been waiting for this moment. So had everyone here. And yet, even as relief washed over me, one thought lingered in the back of my mind. Something unfinished. Something unsettled. Because the lake had stories of its own, and not all of them had surfaced yet. The afternoon sun settled low over the Wyoming tree line, painting long gold streaks across the water. The lake looked different now, lighter somehow, as though the weight it had been carrying for years finally sank to the bottom. The breeze carried the faint smell of pine sap and warm earth, drifting gently across my father's old dock. For the first time since moving back, the shoreline wasn't tense or guarded. It felt alive again. Neighbors slowly emerged from their houses, families walking down the narrow gravel paths that led to the water. Children who had once been scolded into silence now sprinted toward the lake's edge with squeals that echoed off the hills. A soft wave of laughter rose as parents unpacked folding chairs and coolers, dusting off a tradition the HOA had stolen from them. Tom stood beside me on the dock, arms crossed, fishing pole tucked under one elbow. He nodded toward the gathering crowd. "Been a long time since we saw this," he said. "Too long," I replied. The lake shimmered back at us, as if it agreed. Over by the old fire pit, once roped off with HOA restricted use signs, neighbors had begun to set up for a cookout. Someone dragged out a small grill. Someone else set a radio on a stump, letting soft country music float over the water. Sheriff Marcus had stayed too, leaning against his cruiser with a rare, easy smile. Sarah approached me on the dock, her brown leather briefcase now replaced with a paper cup of lemonade. "You did good today," she said. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "We all did." She clinked her cup lightly against mine. "Here's to a lake finally free." But beneath the celebration, something kept tugging at my mind. A quiet undercurrent, a ripple left behind after the storm. I walked farther down the dock, letting my boots thud against the old boards. The water below glowed in soft amber light, moving gently against the wooden posts. Peaceful. Familiar. But not entirely settled. The lake had been the heart of this fight. Its boundaries. Its access. Its ownership twisted by Bethany, until she convinced the neighborhood she owned something she never did. But it wasn't just the HOA she tried to build. It was a kingdom. A fiefdom where fear held more sway than truth, and kingdoms rarely fall without leaving shadows. Tom reeled in his line and cast again. "You thinking about her?" he asked. "Not exactly," I said. "Just thinking how something like this could go on for so long." Tom exhaled through his nose. "Fear's a funny thing. Folks don't always need chains when someone convinces them the door's locked." The words hit harder than I expected. Behind us, a little girl ran past holding a towel twice her size. Her father jogged after her, laughing. A dog barked happily near the shoreline. The lake was waking up again, shaking off years of silence. A wave of relief swept over me. But then my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. My stomach tightened even before I opened it. "Congratulations on your victory. You have no idea what you've started." A friend. A cold current slid through my chest. Everything around me, the laughter, the music, the sunlit ripples, momentarily faded into a low hum. I read the message again, slower this time, as if the meaning might change. It didn't. Sarah noticed the shift in my expression and stepped closer. "Something wrong?" I handed her the phone. She read it, jaw tightening slightly. "Well, that's unsettling." "Yeah," I said. "And vague. Too vague." She looked past me toward the hills, thoughtful. Bethany didn't come up with all this alone. The fake documents, the phony permit system, the fabricated lake rules, that took planning, templates, the kind of material people copy. Marcus overheard us and walked over. "Everything all right?" Sarah showed him the message. He read it and nodded slowly. "We've been hearing about similar HOA fraud cases popping up in other lake towns. Some of the paperwork looked familiar." Tom whistled softly. "Sounds like Bethany was just one piece of something bigger." I looked back out at the lake, the place my father protected for decades, the place I'd come to heal. The water shimmered calmly against the shore, but it felt different now, like the surface had thinned and something beneath was stirring. We stood there in silence for a moment, listening to the soft slap of water against the posts. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder. "You won your fight, Remy. But if something else is happening, bigger, wider, you won't be facing it alone." Sarah nodded. "We'll handle whatever comes next. For now, let your lake breathe." I took a slow breath of the cool evening air. The scent of grilled burgers drifted through the pines. Children splashed in the water without fear. Neighbors laughed freely for the first time in years. This was what my father always wanted for this place. What every lake community deserved: peace, freedom, truth. Yet the message lingered like a stone dropped quietly beneath the surface. Not threatening, not hostile, just knowing. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked up the dock, joining the others under the fading orange sky. The lake belonged to the people again. That was certain. But the shoreline stories weren't finished. Not by a long shot. And as the last sunlight dissolved into the still water, I felt it in my bones. The next chapter was already on its way. But tonight, we finally got to breathe. If this hit close to home, drop a simple justice in the comments so I know you're still standing your ground. And if you believe folks should never be pushed off the land they've worked and loved, stick around. Hit subscribe and ride with me for the next story. We're just getting started out here.